A storm once drove Prince Alexandre from the golden halls of Paris into a humble roadside inn where a single knight with a young waitress bound their fates in secret. He returned to the palace, chained by titles and the cold hand of his arrogant uncle, a duke who wielded power with cruelty and scorn for the lowborn. She remained behind, mocked by whispers, raising two sons with nothing but courage and the dignity of her labor. Years later, in a crowded square, the prince's gaze falls upon those boys, lively twins whose faces mirror his own childhood portraits. And from that moment, destiny begins to turn with a force that neither crown nor scandal can contain. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The carriage rolled out of the morning mist and onto cobblestones worn smooth by carts and boots. Hooves clattered, iron to stone, and the wheels hissed as they passed a puddle left from the night's rain. The air held a smell of wet earth and warm bread, and somewhere close a baker's door stood open, letting out a ribbon of heat into the chill. He listened, as if the town were a page being turned. Voices rose and fell in the square ahead. He tapped the ceiling with his gloved knuckles. "Here," he said. The driver reined in. The team blew steam into the air like living chimneys. A guard leaned from the rear, scanning the square, hand near the hilt it needn't touch. 10 minutes, the guard murmured. 5, Alexandre answered without looking at him. He had chosen a plain coat for this journey, the kind a gentleman might wear to escape notice among honest tradesmen. It did not help. The carriage itself told a different story. Polished wood, discreet crest almost hidden beneath dust. Horses too fine for a provincial errand. Even incognito rank announced itself. He put a hand to the door and paused. The square opened like a stage. Stalls crowded with apples and onions, skeins of dyed wool bright against gray stone, a line of pigeons watching from a roof with the patience of statues. He stepped down, and the day met him fully. Sounds sharpened. Water slapped against the basin of the fountain. Coins glimmered beneath the ripples. A woman bargained loudly for a bolt of linen, laughter trailing behind her words. Children sprinted down an alley, vanished, then burst into the square again like sparrows flushed from a hedge. He used the excuse of bread to cover his looking. He walked without haste, the heels of his boots speaking a rhythm as measured as his breathing. He let his hand rest on the back of a bench as if steadying himself, though what rocked him was not the uneven cobbles. There, 2 boys, maybe 6. Their clothes were simple, patched cleanly at the elbows, laces tied with care. One wore a strip of red cloth as a belt, the other had a button sewn on with mismatched thread. They circled the fountain with the momentum of planets, every pass a new orbit of glee. Their laughter lifted above the rest like a bell rung in a chapel. He saw their faces. He did not understand what he saw until his heart rose into his throat and stalled there. They were his childhood put into 2 bodies. The echo was so precise, it defied caution. The straight bridge of the nose, the notch in the left eyebrow where hair thinned almost imperceptibly, the shape, the unmistakable shape, of a smile that fought to be full but settled into a half-curve when it dared too much. A portrait in his mother's salon had fixed that mouth in oils. He had studied it with boyish contempt, then later with resignation. Now it moved in flesh before him. He swallowed. The guard shifted behind him and he resented the sound. Every sense called him forward. Every lesson in decorum demanded he stay very still. He chose a place near a stall of pears and pretended to examine the fruit. His hand closed on the smooth skin of one, and he felt its weight the way a man checks a coin. The vendor watched him with the frank attention small towns gave strangers. He did not look back. The boys clambered onto the lip of the fountain and wobbled, arms out like tightrope walkers on a line of stone. One laughed, the other tried to hush him, which made them both laugh harder. The sound hit something raw inside him, something he'd trained into silence for years. Where was their mother? A cup clinked against crockery. He turned toward the tremor of a familiar presence before his mind admitted why it moved him at all. She stood not 20 paces away, a basket on one arm, the other hand raised to shade her eyes from the thin sun. Her hair was caught at the nape in a simple twist. The line of her neck was as he remembered it. He had no right to the memory. It came anyway. Claire. The name formed soundlessly. It touched his tongue with the heat of a brand no one else could see. He felt the way one feels the last step in the dark, a lurch between what is and what is remembered. The years had thinned nothing essential in her. Her dress was modest, the color of smoke. The care with which it had been mended made it a quiet badge in itself. He took in the strong set of her shoulders, the stillness she held even in motion. She scanned the square with a mother's quickness. "Maman," one boy called. It did not matter which. Both had the same shape of voice. She faced them, and the light shifted across her eyes. It was as if the square had held its breath to watch what would happen to their color. "Down," she called. "Both of you." Her tone was even, firm. The boys climbed down, boots skidding over the green slick that gathers where stone meets water. One hopped the last inch and landed with a small grunt of triumph. She smiled, and the expression was a confession he had not earned. Then the smile thinned as her gaze moved past the boys and lit on him. He did not look away quickly enough. Recognition does not require words. It took one heartbeat, and then there were two of them, divided by 10 paces, and everything else. Her grip tightened on the basket. The corner of the cloth inside it lifted with the wind, revealing a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, 2 small tin cups. The scene was ordinary, almost stubborn in its refusal to be anything else. His pulse pounded like a secret drummer under his coat. He watched the muscle in her jaw jump and settle. She turned back to the boys, her motion smooth, no panic in it. She had learned to hide her feelings where children could not see them. The guard moved closer, a shadow at Alexandra's shoulder. "Time," he said softly. "Another minute," Alexandra said. It was barely air. A cart squeaked behind them. A dog shook rain from its fur. His senses recorded everything because it was easier than letting his mind attend to the main question. What now? His life had been built on a series of bridges with no railings. He had learned to cross them by looking only at what lay straight ahead. Duty does not ask whether your feet ache. Duty expects you to keep walking. Yet here he stood, stilled by 2 small faces and a woman who had learned to carry quiet as if it were a basket. One of the boys slipped his hand into his brother's and tugged. They moved like one creature with 2 bodies, collecting small stones as if they were rare treasure, holding them to the light, discarding most. The second boy had something tight-fisted in his palm. He lifted it to his nose, sniffed as if it had a smell one could capture. He kept it close. Claire adjusted the shawl at her shoulders and looked back to the stall. She said a word to the vendor he did not hear. The boys darted ahead and halted, a hand on the fountain's edge as if the stone itself could give permission. She nodded once. They leaned in, their heads almost touching, watching their own faces bend with the water. He could not stay here in the open any longer. To linger would erase his effort at invisibility. To leave felt like a theft. He chose life as a gentleman would. He paid for the pear he had crushed with indecision and tucked it under his arm like any ordinary purchase. He turned a fraction to go, and then checked himself. If he left now, he would carry the shape of this square inside him like an unhealed wound. He would not come and go again, as if only bread and duty had brought him. He stepped toward the fountain. "Careful," he said to no one in particular, voice pitched for the air. He was close enough now to hear the boys' breaths quicken from play. Close enough to see that the thing held in the second boy's fist was not a stone at all, but an object fashioned by hands and time. A small wooden horse, smoothed by years, the edges rounded where a knife had once tried to make angles. The grain stood up like hair where it had been rubbed and rubbed. Heat rose in his throat. The square narrowed to the piece of wood, and the small hand that clutched it. Memory did not have to be invited. It arrived, sat where it wanted, put mud on the carpet. He smothered it. He had no right to drift backward even in thought. Still, his eyes had already traced what they knew to be there, the uneven notch along the left hind leg where the blade had skipped, the carved line at the neck that did not quite meet its mate. He had made those errors. He had recognized them with a curse, and then, later with a kiss pressed against a cheek in a room where winter had played a kinder note for one night. He forced himself to breathe. The boy with the horse caught him looking and drew the toy closer to his chest, as if the gaze itself were a hand. For a moment his expression turned wary, the way children weigh unknowns. The boy's brother followed the look and made his own assessment in a fraction of a second. The younger one, bolder, took one step forward and peered up. "You're far from home," the guard said low. Alexandra answered without turning. "So are we all." He made a gesture that could be read as nothing more than courtesy and stepped aside to give the boys room to pass. Another man might have asked for the time, made a joke, bent to pick up a coin and gained a moment more. He chose restraint. He had lived on restraint. It was brittle in his mouth now. Claire moved as if tugged by a string. Her gaze flicked between the boys and the stranger she knew too well. She drew closer, one step, then another. The shawl slipped further. He saw the quick rise of breath at the hollow of her throat, then the way she mastered it and set it down again. Slow. She kept her back straight. Every woman in this square had learned that. Straight back, chin level, eyes taking everything in while revealing nothing. Still, there was a tremor at the corner of her mouth that only a man who had watched that mouth closely would see. Both boys turned to her at the same instant, as if her silence were a word. She nodded to them and they stilled. She did not speak. The distance between her and Alexandra held. It was precise, practical. A decade could live inside a silence like that. He let the pair slide from his hand into the basket of a nearby stall with a small thud. He did not look at the vendor, did not offer a coin again. He had already paid for the right to be here as any other man. He no longer knew what he was allowed to be. "Sir?" the guard prompted, the question packed tight in a single syllable. "Soon," Alexandra said. If he spoke softer than he meant to, it was because the fabric of his thoughts was wearing thin. He felt each thread as it strained. This was not a scene to be seen. It was a private wound cut open in public air. A breeze stirred the square. The cloth in Claire's basket lifted again. A slice of white cheese shone briefly, a wedge of noon light. The boy's hair flattened, then lifted again. One of them tipped on his toes to catch the wind. The other used the fountain's rim for balance, palm slick with water. In the push of that breath of air, one boy, it was the one with the toy, lost his footing for a blink, then righted himself with quick pride. He grinned at no one in particular. He looked down at his hand as if to count his fingers. He opened his fist half an inch, and the wooden horse slipped, a slow slide along skin, then dropped. It struck stone with a dry click, spun, and edged toward the gutter where runoff pooled in a thin ribbon. Time changed shape. The square dimmed. The world narrowed to the future of that single object as it skated on the slow water's pull. The boy lunged. His brother grabbed his sleeve. The horse drifted like a small boat cutting a curve toward the drain's black mouth. Alexandra moved. The motion surprised him because he had not decided to move. His hand reached the toy's path just before the gutter could claim it. Wet seeped through the glove, cold slicing skin and leather as one. He caught the horse and lifted it clean. The boy looked up at him. For a breath, they shared a single circle of attention. Their faces, the toy, the knowledge that one belonged to the other in ways neither could spell out. The horse fit perfectly in Alexandra's palm, as if his hand remembered its shape. The boy's gaze moved to the notch along the leg, then back to his eyes. "Thank you," the guard started to say behind him, mistaking the action for courtesy to a child of the town. Alexandra did not answer. The boy's brother edged closer, curiosity beating caution. He breathed in the smell of wet wood, as if that would tell him something. Claire crossed the last of the distance between them, the basket steady on her arm. She paused at the exact place where to step forward would be to enter his space. To step back would be to refuse him entirely. She chose neither. The middle held. She reached for the toy. He felt what it did to him that her hand would be near his. He lifted the horse to pass it to her, then shifted and held it for the boy instead. The change was instinct, not strategy. The child accepted the horse with a solemnity that belonged to ceremonies. His fingers closed around it and then caressed the notch, as if making sure the world had not shifted so much that the mark could disappear. Claire's eyes were on Alexandra's face. He saw the precise instant when she knew for certain. Recognition can be a gentle light or a blade. It cut clean and then steadied, and in steadiness there was anger, and something else as deep as the well beneath the square. "Sir," the guard said again. He pressed his lips together to keep any sound from betraying him. Silence had served him. Silence had cost him more. He looked at Claire and tried to find the man in himself, rather than the title laid on his shoulders by birth and policy. He did not know whether to speak her name. Names are bells. Once rung, they cannot be unrung. She freed one hand from the basket and smoothed the boy's hair in turn. It was an ordinary gesture, the sort one sees 100 times and forgets. He would remember this one if he lived 100 years. It said without saying that she had done this alone 1,000 mornings and would do it 1,000 more. It said she had taught them to be careful near water and strangers, and that she judged this particular danger worth facing with her chin level and her eyes open. He glanced down at the wooden horse again. His mind refused to lie to him any longer. There are things a man can pretend not to see. This was not one of them. Evidence is not always paper and seal. Sometimes it is a flaw in a carving, a line cut 2 degrees too shallow, a piece of oneself that shows up in a child's laugh. The driver flicked the reins lightly. The horses shifted. The square murmured. The sound folded around them, indifference on the surface, curiosity beneath. He could not linger under the pretense of buying fruit much longer. He had chosen a plain coat, but his face would betray him to anyone with a good memory, and nothing better to do than watch a stranger watch 2 boys. He forced himself to turn 3 degrees toward the carriage. One of the boys mirrored the motion, as if the 2 of them were attached by a thread. The boy's hand tightened around the toy, and he came half a step after it, drawn by instinct. Claire's hand landed on his shoulder, a weight as soft as it was firm. The boy stopped. He accepted her command with the ease of someone who trusts more than he understands. "Another minute," the guard insisted. "Yes," Alexandra said. He felt the word anchor him in a place that was anything but steady. He saw how easily a minute can contain a lifetime if you load it with all the things a man has refused to carry elsewhere. He tasted metal at the back of his tongue and realized he had bitten the inside of his cheek. A bell tolled from a church somewhere beyond the roofs, the tone low, a single count. Noon would come and then pass like any other day. The world would move along its grooves regardless of what choices he made. His choices would cut new grooves in a smaller world, the one that held only the people standing within arm's reach of him now. He had been taught that the greater good required smaller griefs. He understood suddenly that sometimes the smaller griefs have names and faces and palms with wet wood stains on them. The boy with the toy glanced at the horse once more, then at Alexandra, as if to see whether the stranger would demand it back by right of age, or height, or some rule he did not yet know. Alexandra kept his hands at his sides. He saw the thought pass through the boy's face and vanish like cloud moving from sun to shadow and back. He let himself draw a breath. Slow. He could not speak here. He should not. He knew the terrain of scandal and the way rumors plant themselves in soil like this and bloom into things uglier than their seeds. Discipline rose up, the trained thing that had kept him alive all these years. It met the softer thing in him with the inevitability of a tide meeting a rock. He began to step back, the way a man withdraws from an edge. Claire's gaze tracked him. She did not blink. Her sons leaned into her side, the smaller pressing against her hip, the larger trying to stand a fraction taller. A crescent of water had soaked the hem of her skirt, where it had brushed the fountain's rim. It darkened the cloth, drew its own line around her, a mark like a seal on a letter he had not yet read and would be made to answer. He stopped. He could not leave this square with only silence between them and the sound of water as witness. He did not have the right to speak to her in public. He could not force privacy upon her with the force of what he was. He had only this, a look. He gave it, full, steady, asking nothing, admitting everything he dared admit, without letting the words themselves loose to march into the world. She took it. She set it somewhere inside herself where it would neither rot nor flare. Then she lifted her chin a fraction, a motion so small a casual eye would have called it nothing. He knew better. It was permission of a kind, or refusal, or both. It told him that she retained ownership of her dignity, and of these boys, and of the history he had tried to live as if it were a rumor. His guard shifted his weight. The horses shook their traces. Somewhere a knife struck a chopping block, and the sound rang like a hammer on iron. The sky had cleared. Light lay over the square with the hush of a hand laid on a fevered brow. Alexandra opened his mouth. He did not know whether a name would come out, or an apology, or a lie meant to buy time he had already spent. The boy with the wooden horse tilted his head, waiting for a word he would not understand, but would remember for an hour, an afternoon, perhaps a lifetime in the way children carry certain moments without knowing what they are. The wooden horse gleamed in the boy's grip. Water had made the grain dark. His thumb drew a pale track across it as it dried. It was a toy, a nothing. It was also proof, and proof demands judgment. He froze. His gaze locked on the little wooden horse in the boy's palm, as Claire met his eyes with a steady, unyielding look that dared him to choose between silence and the truth. The boy's fingers closed again around the wooden horse, and the moment snapped like a cord pulled too tight. Claire pulled her sons close and turned away, her basket steady on her arm. Alexandra did not follow at once, though every instinct urged him forward. He stood until the crowd swallowed her, until the last glimpse of her shawl vanished behind the inn's low archway. Only then did he move, his boots striking the stones too sharply. The guard murmured a warning about time, but Alexandra waved him off. His retinue waited with stiff patience near the carriage, the horses stamping at flies, the wheels creaking as if to remind him of obligations waiting. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on the inn door where Claire had disappeared. He knew that place, knew the echo of its walls. He had left a part of himself there once, years ago. He walked slowly toward it. The sign above the arch creaked in the breeze, unchanged since that night. The door hung open, letting out the smell of broth, yeast, and smoke-darkened beams. He stepped inside. The taproom was dim after the glare of the square. A low fire burned at the hearth, smoke clinging to the rafters. Voices murmured around a few tables where men in work coats drank their midday cider. A serving girl crossed with a tray, and for a fleeting moment he thought it was Claire again. The sight of a stranger steadied him. Then he saw her at the far end, setting down her basket on the counter, speaking in a low tone to the innkeeper. The boys darted past her legs toward the stairs, already laughing again, already carrying their secret resemblance without weight. She felt his presence before she saw him. Her shoulders tightened, and her head lifted slightly. Slowly she turned. For a moment, neither moved. Then she took up her basket again as if to go about her business. He stepped closer. "Claire." Her eyes flashed, then cooled. "Your Highness." The title was soft, almost ironic, but her voice did not tremble. "Not here," he murmured. "Here is all I have," she replied, and turned away. The innkeeper glanced up, wary. Alexandra gave the man the kind of look that dismissed further inquiry. He followed Claire through a narrow side door that opened into the garden. The path was lined with bare vines, the soil damp from the rain. The sky above was clearing, strips of blue cutting through gray. They stopped near the low wall. The silence between them was heavier than words. "You knew I was here," he said at last. "I knew the moment I saw your carriage," she answered. Her eyes held his with calm defiance. "The whole town knew. That is what a prince carries, even in plain cloth." He looked away at the vines, twisting, leafless, patient in their waiting. "The boys," she cut him off. "They are mine." The words struck sharper than a blade. He drew breath. "And mine." Her laugh was brief and without mirth. "Now you claim them? After years of silence?" His jaw tightened. "I did not know. You knew enough to leave." Her voice caught, then steadied. "I did not ask you to stay. But you left knowing what could follow. And when it did, I bore it alone." The garden smelled of wet earth. A bird lifted from the wall and vanished over the roof. He let the sound pass before he spoke. "I should have come back." "You did not." Her words pinned him. He felt the weight of them settle into his chest. "Let me see them." "You have already seen too much." One of the boys' voices floated through the window above, high and untroubled. The other joined, and their laughter mingled. Alexandre closed his eyes, gripping the low wall, his knuckles whitening. "You cannot hide them," he said softly. "I have never hidden them," she answered. "They play in the square, they speak to everyone. What I have hidden is the truth. For their sake. For mine." He looked at her sharply. "And for mine. For yours most of all." The words stung because they were true. He had lived inside privilege so gilded, he forgot how sharp its edges could be for others. She had carried that sharpness alone, letting it cut her quietly, rather than let it wound him publicly. A door creaked, and footsteps entered the garden. Alexandre's hand fell from the wall, his posture returning at once to the rigid line of rank. It was only a stable boy passing with a bucket, his head lowered. Still, the spell was broken. Claire stepped back, her basket against her hip. "You must go. Already people have seen too much." He leaned toward her, lowering his voice. "We are not finished. We were finished years ago." Their eyes locked. For a moment, the air between them thickened with something that had not faded with time, though both wished it had. The inn door creaked again. One of the twins came rushing out, wooden horse in hand, cheeks flushed from play. He saw Alexandre and stopped. His little brow furrowed in curiosity. Then, as naturally as breathing, he walked up and tugged at Alexandre's coat sleeve. "Play?" the boy asked. Alexandre froze. The toy pressed into his hand like judgment. His throat tightened, and he dared not look at Claire. From the corner of the garden, movement stirred. A tall figure lingered at the gate, half hidden, eyes fixed sharply on the scene. One of his uncle's aides, a man sent to monitor every detail of his conduct. Alexandre saw the gleam of suspicion there, saw how the man measured the boy's features against his own. The aide turned without a word and strode back toward the square, steps purposeful. Alexandre's stomach sank. Claire, watching, whispered, "What have you done?" The boy tugged at his hand again, but Alexandre could not move. His eyes stayed locked on the gate where the aide had vanished, the echo of his retreat already racing toward the Duke. The truth that had been theirs alone was no longer secret. The garden held its breath after the aide vanished, as if the vines themselves were listening for the beat of hooves that would carry the rumor to the ear that mattered most. Alexandre stood with the small hand still warm on his sleeve and the wooden horse gleaming wet in a child's fist. Claire's whisper had landed like a blow he could not dodge. "What have you done?" He found his voice only enough to say, "Get them inside." She didn't argue. One boy pressed himself into her side at once. The other lingered half a step, then yielded when she touched his shoulder. "Up!" she told them, quiet and steady. Small feet thudded on the stair beyond the back door, a ragged drumbeat. She waited until the last footfall faded, then swung the door half-closed between them as if it were a shield. He took a breath that didn't seem to reach his lungs. "I will come back," he said. "People will be watching. They watch no matter what I do." She held his gaze. "Then choose what you can defend." He had nothing to answer that with. A wind puffed across the garden and lifted the ends of her shawl. For a moment, one heartbeat only, he thought she would ask him to stay. She stepped back instead, and the door shut. He turned toward the archway with the knowledge that a man was already carrying his silence away like contraband. The inn's corridor seemed narrower than it had when he was younger, the ceiling lower, the floorboards louder. He crossed the taproom without looking right or left, aware in the ribs of his back of eyes that were not sure they recognized him, but wanted to tell a story later, in case they had. His guard fell into step. "Where to, sir?" "To my rooms." The street air felt cooler, cleaner. The carriage waited like a question. He did not climb in. He walked, forcing his steps to a measured pace so no one watching from a window would say he fled. He chose a narrow lane that led toward the house the prefect had lent him for 2 nights. A courtesy extended to rank, even when rank hid behind a plain coat. He felt the town's bricks keep their heat as the day cooled. A boy chased a hoop past him and did not look up. A woman shook a rug from a window, and dust rained down like a thin veil that did not touch him. In the front room, his valet set a basin on a stand and bowed. "You have a note, sir. Delivered with urgency." The paper lay on the table, folded crisply and sealed with wax impressed by a signet he did not need to see to recognize. He left it unopened for a long beat, letting the mere fact of it alter what it needed to alter. Then he broke the seal and read the line that mattered. "Come at once." He went. The house the Duke had taken in the town sat directly across from the church, its shutters closed, its door opened by a servant who had expectations in his posture. Alexandra climbed the stairs without touching the rail, because in houses like this, men pretended they did not tire. The Duke sat in a chair with his back to the fire, flames laddering shadows up the wall behind him. He did not rise. He did not need to. Power rearranged a room without movement. He lifted his eyes and fixed them on Alexandra as if aligning a tool. "You sent for me," Alexandra said. "Your aide did. He is useful." The Duke made a small adjustment to the cuffs of his coat and set them down precisely, a man keeping order in mere cloth. "Sit." "I will stand." "As you like." A long pause. "You were observed at the inn." "I was buying bread." "You were observed at the inn with a woman." The Duke let the word sit between them, a glass set down just audibly enough to claim attention. "And with 2 boys." Alexandra's back found a line and held it. "This town is full of boys." "These particular boys," the Duke said, "have your face." Silence salted the air. The fire popped. Somewhere below, a clock ticked with the patient cruelty of all mechanisms that make time audible. The Duke continued, voice almost gentle. "Our family has survived revolutions by understanding appearances. Appearances are not lies. They are tools. The Emperor considers a marriage with a foreign house. The papers have already begun their dance. What do you imagine happens to such negotiations when a rumor from a provincial inn runs parallel? The rumor need not even be true, though in this case..." Alexandra kept his face still. "Do you love this woman?" the Duke asked lightly, a man asking whether the apples this year were less sweet. Alexandra let out one breath. "This is not about love." "You are correct. This is about duty." They shared the word like men share a wall, each on his own side of it, each refusing to be the one to move. The Duke settled into patience. "You will leave this town at dawn. You will complete your inspection and return to Paris. You will keep your distance from the inn and all its occupants. You will allow this chatter to starve without your attention. You will marry as we require. You will do these things not because I prefer them, but because without them, you endanger more than yourself." Alexandra looked at the fire and saw in it not warmth, but consumption. "And if I decline? Then you will learn how quickly a prince can have very few choices. Spare me the threats." "Threats," the Duke said, almost kindly, "are only truths spoken early." Alexandra drew a hand along the back of a chair, but did not sit. "They are children." "They are an outcome," the Duke answered. "One you are not obliged to confirm nor to deny. And if you value the safety of those outcomes, you will not drag them into a light in which they cannot survive." Alexandra half smiled. "You speak of safety as if silence were a shelter and not a cage. I speak of safety as those who have kept a dynasty alive must speak of it. Do not romanticize what can be destroyed by gossip." The Duke's gaze sharpened. "Did the woman ask you for anything?" "No." "Good. Keep it so. If she has any sense, she understands the value of quiet. The world is not kind to the unprotected. Let her keep what peace she has made. Do not imagine that your presence in her life will be a gift." "Perhaps I am not thinking of her peace alone." "I see that." A beat. The Duke's eyes softened in a way that made the next words cut more. "We are all conscripts, Alexandra. Some of us learn to march without taking it personally." A log slipped. Sparks flew and died. Alexandra said, "I will not be ordered to forget that I am a man." "No one asks you to forget it." The Duke gestured once with his fingers, elegant even in dismissal. "We ask you to remember that you are a prince first." "I did not ask to be. Nor did anyone ask to be crushed when you misstep." The Duke stood at last, not as an equal, but as a conclusion. "Go to your rooms. Sleep if you can. Leave at dawn. And for God's sake, use a door no one is watching." The audience was over. Alexandra inclined his head because one bows to a tide even when one hates the sea. In the corridor, the air felt thicker. He stepped into the night and let the cold carry some of the heat out of his skin. The church bell gave a single stroke, unsympathetic. Back in his rooms, he sent away his valet and stared at the pear he had never eaten. He set it on the sill and watched mist bead on its skin until it shone. He did not sleep. He waited for the dark to lighten by half a shade, then by another. By dawn, word had moved through the town with the expertise of lichen creeping over stone. Claire heard it in fragments that fit together without effort. She moved through the taproom like someone learning the new edge of a blade. A woman at the counter held a cup of coffee too long and spilled a dark crescent that looked like an omen. Two laborers argued softly about the price of grain, then lowered their voices more when she passed. A pair of girls came in to buy a heel of yesterday's bread. The older looked at Claire's sons as if measuring something in her head. The younger looked away, embarrassed by her own curiosity. The innkeeper counted coins with uncharacteristic deliberation. "A busy morning," he said to the heir. Claire nodded as if she agreed. "The boys will stay inside," she said, not because anyone had asked, but because the words made a thin fence she could place between them and the world. She sent the twins to the small back room with a handful of wooden spools to roll along the floor. They pushed them along the boards, the spools rattling like distant carts on a bridge. Every time one clacked against the baseboard, she flinched, and then mastered the flinch with shame. A man from the market stopped in and ordered broth. He spoke of nothing in particular: the weather, the mayor's gout, the way the river had dropped an inch this week. Between each topic he took a breath that nearly became another sentence. He finished his bowl and left the coin on the table as if paying for the privilege of having nothing to say around her. The inn's door opened, and a gust blew flour dust from the counter into the air. It settled in her hair and she brushed it away, thinking of snow, though the memory argued with the season. The twins peered around the doorway of the back room. "Play?" one asked. "Here," she said. "Not outside." "Why?" "Because I say so." They didn't press. Children learn where the cliffs are and who will throw rope if they fall. She poured water into a basin and let the sound steady her. She washed 2 cups that didn't need washing. The wooden horse sat on the shelf where her younger son had put it to watch. Its notch caught the light and refused to make itself ordinary. Women came and stood at the counter and spoke of dye and vinegar. One put a hand on Claire's arm and squeezed, as if to signal loyalty or pity. Claire wasn't sure which, and did not have the strength to ask. When the women left, they looked back once, twice, and bit their lips on words they would say elsewhere. Claire felt the heat crawl up her neck and pressed her cool palm to it. By mid-morning, the innkeeper told her 2 men in coats she recognized from the prefecture had walked past the door and peered in, then gone on. "It's nothing," he said, not believing himself. "They always take an interest when the town has out-of-town guests." "Guests leave," Claire said, so quietly he did not answer. She went to the window and watched the square breathe in and out. She had lived long enough with caution to know when the air had changed. It had changed now. She could not decide whether to be grateful that at least the truth had a shape she could see, or terrified that shapes attract attention like flags in a wind. Upstairs, the boys invented a game in which the wooden horse needed rescuing from a flood. She heard their voices and closed her eyes, and for a moment allowed herself the injustice of wishing for a world in which they could carry only their joys. She set the wish down where no one could see it, and went back to work. He came when the sun had fallen just enough to make the window panes glare and the corners of the room soften. He used the side door, his knock 3 beats long, the rhythm of a man who had counted the steps between duty and something else. She opened and let him in without speaking. He had not slept, she saw at once. The skin beneath his eyes had blued. He had shaved too close, as if that could make him look less troubled. He stood just inside the threshold and looked at the narrow kitchen as if it were a church that had been changed into a barn. He had not earned a church. He had found a barn, good enough. "Can we talk, where we won't be watched?" he asked, which was not quite a question. She led him out to the garden, the ground still damp, the vines holding their bony silhouettes against the fence. A cloud moved before the sun, the temperature dropped as if someone had exhaled over water. He didn't waste time. "He summoned me," he said. "Last night." "Of course he did. He told me to leave at dawn." Her mouth worked around a bitter curve that almost became a smile. "You don't take orders well." "I take too many," he said. "That is the trouble." She folded her arms against the sudden cold. "Then you must decide whether to take this one." "I have decided nothing," he said. "That is the truth." "Then let me give you another." She met his eyes and held them. "When you left that night, I knew what might come. When it came, I had no father to call, no brother to hide me, no priest to bargain with God on my behalf. I worked. I ignored the looks. I carried both boys when they were too heavy, and then I carried only one and dragged the other by the hand. I learned which mouths in this town would feed us when work was thin, and which would give me a crust and take a story in return. I learned to listen without hearing, and to look down when eyes tried to make me small. I learned to braid hair into rope." She caught herself and breathed. "I did not do it so that you could arrive and think that the hardest thing I have done is wait. He took it the way men take punishment they know they merit. I do not ask you to forgive me." "Good." She turned her face toward the vines. "I cannot." He stepped closer and then held back as if a sudden taut line had appeared between them. He spoke of a marriage, a foreign match, a useful match. He spoke of appearances as if they were the whole of life. He shook his head once. "He is not wrong about what appearances can do." "Appearances can cut," she said. "They already have. I cannot deny what is in front of me. You did for years." "I told myself there was nothing to deny," he said, and even the honesty of that sounded like a defense he despised. He rubbed his thumb against his fingers, as if trying to rid himself of a stain no one could see. "I know better now." She lifted her chin. "Knowing is the smallest part." Footsteps sounded in the passage. One of the boys edged through the door, hair mussed from play, the wooden horse held by its neck. He saw Alexandra and brightened and ran forward, the way children run toward any new current. "Look," he said, and held up the toy for inspection. Alexandra crouched to take it, then stopped, as if the act of receiving it were a sacrament he had not the right to perform. He sat on the low bench instead, and rested his hands on his knees, open. The boy took that as invitation, and scrambled up with no hesitation at all, planting himself on Alexandra's lap, as if he had been climbing there his whole life. Claire felt something in her chest seize and soften at the same time. She looked away, because to look directly at the image would be to let it own her. Alexandra's hands settled at the boy's sides, fingers light, as if the child were made of spun sugar. "Careful," he said, and the word carried a lifetime's instruction. The boy leaned back against him with the trust of someone who has not yet learned what can be taken away. The other twin hovered in the doorway, cautious. Claire tilted her head once and he came, but slower, the wooden horse bobbing like a buoy in uncertain water. He sat at her feet and made the horse walk along the line between two flagstones, careful to keep to the seam as if the game had a law. Alexandra spoke in a voice meant only for the child on his lap. "Are you tired?" "No," the boy said, muffled in cloth. "Then close your eyes for not being tired," he answered, and Claire had to swallow twice before her throat accepted air. The child's head grew heavier against his chest. He shifted an inch to accommodate the weight and looked up at Claire with an apology he did not shape with words. The apology was not only for the years, it was for the simplicity of this moment, which proved how little the world needs to be happy, and how much effort it takes to secure even that little. She sat on the low wall and watched, her hands folded and unfolded. A bird lit on the fence post, cocked its head, and found nothing to fear. The boy's breath evened. In the shadow of the vine, his lashes made dark commas on his cheeks. Alexandra's face softened into something she remembered in the dark long ago, gentleness without audience. He bent his head and listened to the small sound. His hand moved up, slow, barely touching, and smoothed a lock of hair that had fallen forward. He did not look at her. He could not. "You can say it," she said after a long time, because silence had its own cruelty. "You can say you want to take them away. Men say such things when their hearts discover late what their hands have not earned." "I am not a man who takes," he said, "not from you. You are a man who leaves." He flinched. The boy shifted and sighed and sank deeper. The other twin looked up from the horse and, seeing sleep, softened his own game without being told. Alexandre kept his voice very low. "I do not know what to do." "That is a start." He sat in the confusion like a penitent in a church that had yet to be built. He watched her watch him. Every sound the town made beyond the fence felt at once intrusive and necessary. A wagon rolling, a dog barking twice, a woman calling to a child with an impatience that did not conceal love. "I have thought of you every week," he said suddenly, as if the truth had tripped him. "Perhaps that makes it worse." "It only makes it true." "They will tell me to forget this," he said. "They have already told me. They will tell me that remembering does no one any good." "Then decide whom you want to do good to." He risked her eyes. "I came to ask for time." "Time is not yours to ask from me," she said. "You have taken enough of it." He let that settle. He did not argue because he could not win, and because her anger felt like a floor he could stand on. The boy on his lap made a small, questioning noise. Alexandra soothed him without thinking, palm drawing wide circles on a tiny back, the movement so natural it betrayed him. The other twin yawned, sudden and explosive, the kind of yawn that makes a body helpless. He put the wooden horse in her lap and put his head there too. The weight of him landed and stayed. Claire laid a hand on his hair. The strands were warm. She felt their future tug at her from all directions at once. "I am being pulled," Alexandra said. And if the words were simple, the weight behind them threatened to break his ribs. I know. She did not add that she would not be his shelter from that pull. She would be a shore he could land on if he chose, not a tide that carried him where he wanted to go without making him swim. Footsteps in the passage. Not hesitant now, but brisk, with purpose. The innkeeper's shape filled the doorway for a blink, then retreated as if the news he carried could not be borne by a frame as thin as his. A second later, he returned with a man in dark livery he did not introduce. The newcomer's boots left clean prints on the damp threshold. He took in the scene with the economy of someone trained to register only what mattered and to pretend that none of it mattered at all. He carried a leather pouch, and from it drew a folded paper thick enough to serve as a plank. "Your Highness," he said to the air between them. Claire's spine went iron. The twins stirred, sensing a change in the weather. Alexandra shifted the sleeping boy carefully to the bench and stood without letting his body announce any sort of guilt. The messenger held out the letter. The wax seal glowed red in the pale light, the mark in it as unmistakable as a signature on a face, the Duke's crest. Alexandra took the paper and held it as one holds a blade that cuts either way. He broke the seal and read, and Claire did not need to see the words to know what they said. She could hear the return in the silence between his breaths. The command was clear enough for a child to understand, and she saw it land in him with a force that made her grip the edge of the bench to keep from flinching, as he looked up from the page with the weight of the Duke's order in his voice. Return to Paris at once. The words on the page were few, but they thickened the air as if smoke had rolled in from a fire no one could see. Return to Paris at once. The seal lay broken on the table like a red wound. The messenger waited, the set of his shoulders rigid, the way men hold themselves when they are present for things they must pretend not to understand. Alexandra did not look up at once. He read the line again as if the letters might change on a second pass. They did not. He folded the paper with care and slipped it back into its cover. "You will have an answer," he said. The messenger inclined his head, neither eager nor slow. "Your Highness." "Not yet." Alexandra's voice was even. He had spent a lifetime keeping his tone like a level measure across uneven ground. "Tell His Grace I have received his order." "And that you will obey it?" "I have received it," he repeated. And the messenger understood he was dismissed. When the door closed, sound rushed back into the kitchen in small doses, water ticking in a pot, a spoon set gently on wood, the breath of a child asleep in the next room. He could not make the world be quiet enough to let him think. He could not make it loud enough to drown out thought. He stepped into the garden. The sky had torn itself open to show a hard blue, the edges of clouds white as bone. The vines along the wall lifted twig fingers as if to catch the light. Claire stood by the low bench, watching the doorway, as if the words he had just read had been spoken aloud, and now hung there like a curtain she must push through. He came to her with that still care a man learns when he approaches a precipice on which he has chosen to stand. "He calls me back," he said. "Of course he does. I am not leaving, not yet." Her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in a kind of surprised pain. "You cannot disobey him." "I can delay," he said. He looked at the door the messenger had used. "I can ask time of a clock that does not belong to me." "Time," she said, and her mouth hardened. "Easy word, hard thing. I need to ask you something harder. You have already asked too much of me." He took that blow and did not try to step aside from it. He had come expecting none of this to be easy. He had earned none of it. He would not pretend otherwise. He stood very still. "Are they mine?" Silence made a circle around them. The square breathed beyond the wall. A woman laughed and the sound ended quickly, like a jar covered. A cart rolled, rhythms and wheels over seams in stone. Claire held his gaze until looking became an act of will neither of them could sustain. She let her eyes fall to the damp line on her skirt where it had brushed the fountain earlier. When she looked up again, the answer was already there in the square of her jaw and the lift of her chin. "Yes," she said. "They are yours." There was no accusation in her tone, because accusation would have made the answer smaller. There was no plea in it, because plea would have made it easier. There was only fact, and fact is the sharpest instrument when men have dulled every other blade. He let a breath leave him, and did not draw another for a count that could have been seconds or a lifetime. Something in his chest rose and sank, not grief, not shock, not even joy, but a recognition that felt like the most honest pain he had known. "I will not let them live without a name," he said. "They have names." Her voice was soft, but the correction had steel in it. "They have mine. I know what you mean." He reached for the low wall and missed, his hand hovering in the air between them, empty. "I thought often of coming back," he said, the confession tasting like rain. "You did not." "No. Thinking is not doing," she said. "Men make that mistake and call it tragedy. Women call it the rest of the week." His mouth almost found a smile and refused. "I have wronged you." "Yes. I will not wrong you again." "We will see," she said. A soft sound came from the room within. One son stirring in sleep, the other answering with the deep breath children take when they sense change near them and pretend not to. Claire glanced at the door. Her whole body made the motion of a mother measuring time in breaths and errands, not in decrees. "Whatever you decide," she said, "do not decide it for them without thinking who pays." "Then tell me," he said, stepping closer. "Tell me what you want." She lifted her shoulders and let them fall as if she had set down something she had been carrying for too long. "I want them to be safe. I want them not to be pointed at. I want them to be boys until they must be men. I want to stand in the market and count coins and not count stairs. I want—" She stopped, because wanting had its limits in public air. "I want them to know why their mouths look like yours. And I want that knowledge not to cost them everything." He nodded once. "I can make enemies quiet. You can make enemies angry," she said. "Quiet comes later, or never." The door clicked, and the innkeeper's shape filled the frame for a heartbeat. He looked apologetic. "Claire," he said, "the square. There is talk. They say the Duke's men are asking questions, and your name is in their mouths." She straightened. "Then I will be in the square too." Alexandra turned at once. "No," he said. She met his refusal the way one meets a wind. "If they will speak of me, they can do it where I can hear. I will not be made smaller behind a door." He recognized the force in that, and respected it. He hated it, because it would put her directly where danger had decided to be. "I am coming," he said. "I did not invite you." "I am coming," he repeated, and she understood that he intended not to lead, but to stand where blows would fall. They went together through the narrow passage, past the shelf where the wooden horse waited like memory made wood. In the tap room, the air thickened as heads turned and then pretended to turn away. The street beyond the arch had changed since morning. The statue of the Virgin above the corner shrine looked down on a crowd that had grown by layers, vendors who had left their stalls, women with baskets on their hips, men who had meant to fill a barrel and paused with the bucket halfway. At the near edge of the square stood a small knot of men in coats cut better than the rest, and at their center a figure whose presence filled a gap the way a boulder fills a stream. The Duke did not need a draft of court around him to be recognized. He required only the way men made a path without being told to. He had chosen to bring his quiet with him. He did not raise his voice. He did not spread his arms. He simply stood, and attention rearranged the square to look toward him. Claire felt the visible hand of power and set her feet as if the stones themselves might shift. Alexandra measured the distance and let it remain. He would not crowd her. He would not leave her alone. The Duke's eyes took them in, and what he considered did not appear on his face. He inclined his head a fraction, a courtesy that acknowledged what could not be entirely hidden, the past between his nephew and this woman. Then he looked at Claire directly. "Madame," he said, not unkindly. She kept her chin level. "My lord." He lifted his gloved hand and a man behind him stepped forward. In his palm lay a purse, leather smooth and fat with coin. The line of onlookers bent with the motion, curiosity making them taller. The Duke did not glance at the purse. "You are the subject of talk," he said to Claire, as if he were discussing weather. "Talk can be quieted. Most mouths tire. Some need a reason to tire sooner." He nodded once. The man extended the purse toward her. Claire did not move. Her face did not change, though the color had gone from it. Alexandra's heart struck once, hard, as if to kick him into motion. The Duke continued, patient. "Take what will make your life easier. Leave this town for a time, to a place where no one recognizes the line of a child's mouth. We will arrange it. We will be generous. We will not be vindictive. We will simply be practical." Claire gave the purse the kind of look one gives a snake. "And if I refuse?" The Duke's eyes did not sharpen. They softened. "That was worse. Then you will suffer. Your children will suffer. Not by my will, but by the world. And I will not be able to stop it without doing harm in other directions you cannot see." The purse hung there between them, weighty and obscene under the sky. Alexandra stepped forward, and the movement carried a sound with it. A small intake of breath from the crowd, surprise wrapped in hunger. He placed himself at Claire's side, shoulder almost touching, and made the living line visible. A prince, a woman, and, behind them, at the inn doorway, 2 boys peering with wide eyes. "Your Grace," he said. "Alexandra," the Duke answered, almost fond. "You are late to your own obedience." "I will not allow this," Alexandra said, quiet. "What do you imagine you are not allowing?" The Duke's tone was almost curious. "Money, mercy, sensible arrangement?" "Silence," Alexandra said, "the kind that eats a life." He felt Claire look at him without turning her head. He kept his gaze on the man who had taught him the shape of duty. The Duke let his hand fall, the purse still in his agent's palm. He did not reach for threats. He did not need to. "You forget yourself." "I remember myself," Alexandra answered. "That is the trouble." From the edge of the crowd, a woman whispered too loudly to another, and the words ran along a wire to reach them. "Shame. Bastards." A different voice, softer. "Poor little ones." The words did what words do. They made the thing in the square both larger and less real. The Duke made a small motion with 2 fingers. The man with the purse stepped closer to Claire, as if her nerves could be negotiated. "Take it," he said. "You will live easier. You will live." Claire lifted her hand. For a raw moment, Alexandra thought she would accept and saw the sense in it and hated the sense. Then her hand closed on air instead and dropped to her side. "I cannot," she said. "Not this way." "Pride?" the Duke asked, still mild. "Dignity," she said. "Words." "Dear food," she said, a tiny bitterness cracking in the sound. Alexandra spoke into that crack. "This ends now." The Duke looked at him, and in the look was disappointment as much as anger. "You mean this begins now, if you insist?" "I insist. You will regret it." "I may." A stir ran through the square like wind in wheat. The innkeeper had come out as far as he dared and stood with his hands on the lintel as if the doorway itself needed bracing. Claire's twins pressed together, the wooden horse held so tight their knuckles went pale. Alexandre turned enough to address not only the Duke, but the space beyond the Duke, the space where rumor had gathered a body and a mouth. He did not raise his voice to a shout. He made it level, plain, so that it could run into the narrowest ears without alarming them. "What you say about this woman," he said, "you say about me. What you do to her, you do to me." He paused and let the words land where they would. "I will not have her shamed for what is mine to carry." A murmuring started, and then halted, because the town had not expected to be included in a sentence like that, and did not yet know its role. The Duke's eyes thinned. Do you comprehend what you declare? I comprehend that I cannot spend another hour pretending not to. And what then? The Duke asked, his patience finally burning at the edges. Do you intend? Alexandre did not look at Claire. He felt her next to him like heat near a hearth. I will bring this to the Emperor, he said. I will accept what follows. A few men at the back actually laughed, small, incredulous barks. One hushed the other, and they looked ashamed at their own nerves showing. The Duke exhaled. And if he tells you what I tell you now, then he will tell me with full knowledge, Alexandre said. Not from rumor, not from fear, from truth. The purse sagged in the agent's hand, ridiculous now. The Duke extended his palm, and without a word the agent placed the leather there. The Duke weighed it once, and then handed it back, the gesture neat and final. Very well, he said. I have attempted to spare everyone. It appears no one will be spared. Alexandre felt exhaustion edge under his resolve, but formed his mouth to quiet. We are spared when we stop lying. You've had practice, the Duke said, and for the first time something like contempt threaded his voice. This little speech will cost you. It will cost her more. Do not pretend otherwise for your own comfort. Alexandre did not pretend. I do not confuse courage with comfort. The Duke took a small step back, which in the math of such moments was an enormous thing. I return to Paris. I will expect you behind me. Quickly. Alexandre inclined his head, neither agreeing nor refusing. The Duke turned and the crowd parted, fear and respect finally outrunning curiosity. Silence uncoiled and lay sprawled across the square. The sunlight had tilted higher and made bright patches on stone, which looked obscene given the rawness in the air. Claire breathed. It sounded like the first breath in hours. She seemed taller than she had minutes before, not because anything had changed in her bones, but because something had changed in the angle by which the world pressed on them. A young man near the fountain crossed himself. A woman with a child on her hip shifted her baby from one side to the other, as if it were someone else's burden. The innkeeper's mouth worked, as if trying to say sorry, and not knowing in which direction to send the apology. Alexandre turned to Claire fully now. The crowd had ears, but there is a way two people can occupy space inside noise and make it feel private. I will go to Paris, he said. I will speak before him. But I will not go as if I am abandoning you. Not now. Not ever again, if I have anything to say in the matter. She looked at him as if evaluating a bridge. You will not always have a say. I will find one, he said. And if you cannot, then I will stand where it hurts with you. A ridiculous sentence for a prince to offer a woman in a square. Ridiculous and true. He went down on one knee on the stone. The sound of it, cloth against grit, was small, but it made bodies pivot. He did not look away from her. He did not bow as a courtier bows to a queen. He knelt like a man lowering himself to the level where a human's eyes live when he chooses to be honest. A murmur lifted, scandalized and hungry, and perhaps, in some throats, relieved. Claire's face did not change for a beat. Then a great deal changed, and she trapped it all within the strict border of dignity. Her hands shook once, and then went still. Her sons watched, not understanding the codes, understanding all the same that something had bent and not broken. He did not touch her. He dared not. Touch would have turned the act into theater. He used only his voice, which was steadier now than it had been all day. I stand with you, he said, every word deliberate. I stand with them. I will not look away. He stayed on his knee until the murmur in the square softened and steadied, until the boys breathing behind them sounded again like the ordinary tide of a day. Then he rose, not with haste, not with drama, simply to the height where a man and a woman can meet each other's eyes without strain. He did not touch her. He let the space between them be honest. We leave now, he said, voice low enough to belong only to them. With you. With them. Her mouth tightened, then eased. If I say no, I will wait, he said. Here, in front of everyone, until you say yes, or until night makes the choice for us. A humorless sound escaped her, almost a breath of disbelief. You have never been a patient man. I have practiced the wrong kind of patience. She looked past him at the doorway where her sons' faces framed the dark like two moons leaning out of a cloud. The wooden horse bobbed once in small fingers. She let the world make its arguments around her and listened to the quiet inside instead. 10 minutes, she said, to gather what is ours. He nodded once. I will see to the carriage. He turned to the innkeeper and spoke with the courtesy due a man whose roof had sheltered more than secrets. The innkeeper's eyes shone with a relief edged in worry. God go with you, he said, then ducked his head as if the words might be too loud. Alexandra sent a guard to bring the carriage to the door. He watched the horse's back, the leather creak, the practiced hands loop traces over iron. The team tossed their heads and blew, catching his urgency as if it were scent. He steadied them with a hand at a warm neck, palms learning the thrum of nerves that were not only his. Inside the inn, Claire moved the way mothers move when time is short, and what matters must be made to fit a basket. She took the boys' extra shirts, their one good pair of stockings, a tin cup they refused to drink without, the scraped wooden horse that needed no packing. She wrapped bread in cloth, tucked in cheese, a small knife, a needle and thread. The boys watched, serious in the face of her concentration, inventing no games now, as if they knew play would cheapen the hour. Will we be back? One whispered. Yes, she said, and left the shape of that answer uncolored. She lifted the basket, and her shawl fell into place like a decision. They stepped out together. The square parted without being told to, a narrow passage opening between faces that had learned caution and curiosity at the same table. Alexandra handed the boys into the carriage first, then offered Claire his hand. She considered it, then accepted. His fingers closed around hers. Heat moved like an acknowledgement neither could deny. She sat opposite her sons, knees touching theirs, eyes touching him with a mix of thanks and warning that made him feel both chosen and warned. He climbed in, and the door shut. The square's noise softened, contained now by wood and glass. He rapped the roof. The wheels turned. The carriage jerked, then found its rhythm. For a time, no one spoke. The boys stared out at the town they knew thinning into fields. Claire watched their profiles instead of the road. Alexandra watched her watching them and found himself measuring the day by the small changes in her face rather than by the milestones outside. The guard rode alongside. The road ran smooth enough where cobbles still held, then loosened into packed dirt that turned to gum under the wheels from the day's lingering damp. Hedges gathered the wind and let it go. A wagtail hopped along a ditch, warily keeping pace. "Are you afraid?" he asked at last, as if the question belonged to the road and not to him. "Always," she said. Then softer. "Not of what you think." "What then?" "That I will have to be grateful," she said, a bleak wit in it. "When all I want is to be equal." He took that in without flinching. "Do not be grateful." "Then give me nothing to be grateful for," she answered. "Only what is right." One of the boys lifted the wooden horse and made it nod, as if it agreed to terms it did not understand. The action loosened something tight in the air, and for a minute they all breathed easier. He spoke to the boys as a man learning a language might try a simple phrase. "We will go to a big house," he said. "There will be many rooms. You must keep close to your mother." "Close," one echoed, as if testing the taste of the word. The other looked at his brother and nodded. Claire's gaze flicked to the door. "How many eyes will be waiting?" "All of them," he said. "I cannot pretend otherwise. And if they look too long, then they will learn to lower their gaze," he said, not as a threat, but as a promise to himself. The road bent. A copse of trees gathered over it like conspirators enclosing a secret. In that green tunnel, the carriage seemed smaller, the world beyond temporarily held at bay. He took the chance the shade offered. Claire. She met his eyes and did not look away. He let his voice be the right size for the space. I have been a coward, he said, for years, not about battles or speeches, about you, about what that night meant, about what came after. I do not ask you to absolve me. I ask only for the chance to be the man I should have been. The line between her brows softened, then returned. Words, she said. Yes, he answered. But I intend to make them heavy with deeds. We will see, she said. The trees broke. Ahead, the road widened and took on the order of a route that knew where it went. Distant walls grew from the horizon as if the day itself were building a stage. He looked at the boys again. If you are tired, you may sleep. We are not, the bolder one said, though his eyes had narrowed and his head had begun to list toward his brother's shoulder. Claire drew them together and let them lean against each other. The wooden horse held between like a talisman. He watched the comfort take root, small and sufficient. He felt his own edges ease and then sharpen, as if his mind were a blade in a fire, heat, then quench, then temper. Why now? Claire asked after a long quiet. You could have walked away. Because I was done walking, he said. Because kneeling felt more like standing than anything I have done in years. A tiny smile cut through her composure. It did not last. It was enough. He leaned back as the city began to gather around them, the road pouring them into a district of buildings that knew the shape of ceremony. Guards at a gate took in the carriage with practiced indifference that grew attentive in a heartbeat when they recognized the travel-stained plainness as camouflage. They saluted and opened. The wheels rolled onto gravel, so precisely raked it looked like a page about to be written on. He looked at Claire. We go in together. Of course, she said. The carriage door opened and steps were lowered. He descended first this time, turning to lift each boy with a care that made the men watching avert their own eyes, as if they had seen too much. Claire took his hand for balance and stepped down. The twins clutched the wooden horse between them like a secret they had decided to share. Inside, the air changed. It smelled of wax and polished wood, of flowers cut early and arranged by someone who thought order a scent. Footfalls became formal on stone. The hush of large rooms drew the voice lower without anyone issuing the instruction. An antechamber swallowed them. The boys pressed close. A door at the far end stood tall, flanked by men who held their stillness like a profession. The weight of expectation pooled before that door, like water held back by sluice gates. He adjusted his coat, then stopped. He did not smooth himself into a version more pleasing to anyone else. He would not offer a picture. He would offer a person. A chamberlain bowed, the gesture measured so it might be the same bow given any day to anyone of rank. They wait. We will not keep them, Alexandra said. And for the first time in hours, his voice startled even himself with its calm. They entered together. The hall's height made people smaller. Light fell from high windows in hard rectangles that cut the floor into bright and dark. Faces gathered like flowers in beds, arranged by rank and relation, nobles in muted colors, officials in dark cloth, the duke in the place he had trained his body to occupy without thinking. He did not move. At the far end of the room, on a dais that did not need to be high to do what it did, the emperor regarded them. He had the stillness of a man accustomed to being the end point of all motion. He did not frown. He did not smile. Alexandra's feet knew how to cross a hall like this without turning traitor. He stopped at the proper distance. He did not look left or right. He felt Claire arrive a pace behind. The boys' breaths caught low. The wooden horse pressed into their shared belly, as if a charm against being far from home. The emperor waited one count longer than comfort. Then, in a voice that made the farthest ear feel included, "You bring guests." "I bring truth," Alexandra said. A whisper moved like a sheet lifted and set down again. The duke's jaw tipped half a degree. His eyes did not blink. The emperor cocked his head. Go on. Alexandra did not make a speech. He made a series of simple sentences and put his whole life into each. Years ago, I spent a night at an inn in the provinces. I was a man before I was a prince. I left. I did not return. I should have. 2 boys were born. I have seen them. I know them. They are mine. I will not pretend they are not. I will not allow their mother to carry alone what is mine to bear. The hall listened the way a field listens to rain. The Duke's mouth flattened into a hard, private line. Someone's fan clicked shut. Somewhere, leather creaked. The Emperor's gaze slid to Claire and paused. He took in the shawl, the mended dress, the way she stood as if she had brought her own floor. He looked at the boys and the toy between them. He looked back at Alexandra. You understand, he said, what the world will do with this. Yes, Alexandra answered. It has already begun. You understand the cost, the Emperor said. I am beginning to, Alexandra said. The Emperor built a silence and then stood it next to the Duke's warnings so that everyone could see the two together and measure them. Your uncle is not wrong, he said. Appearances are instruments. They can be used to defend a throne as surely as bayonets. But instruments break when they are played against truth too long. He descended 1 step. The movement sent an unnameable relief through the hall. Distance had lessened by a fraction that felt like a kindness. You speak of honor, he said. Men will say you are reckless. Others will say you are brave. Neither interests me. What interests me is that you accept the weight of your actions without asking another to crush beneath it. That is a kind of strength we can afford. The Duke inhaled to object. The Emperor lifted a hand and the air stilled. You, sir, he said to the Duke, have served the house with cold sense. I thank you for it. But we do not lead only by hiding the human. Sometimes we lead by letting it stand in daylight and daring the world not to flinch. He turned to Claire. His tone softened without losing any of its power. Madame, this court can be cruel by accident and by design. It will look at you as if you were a problem. You are not. You are a fact. Facts have a gravity no opinion can alter. She bowed her head once, the exact degree that counted as respect and not supplication. Sire, she said, voice steady. He looked at the boys. What are your names? It was a practical question, not a sentimental one. They answered nearly together, tripping over their courage and their consonants. The wooden horse made a dull thunk as it hit the floor, and one of them stooped quickly to retrieve it, cheeks coloring at the minor misstep. The Emperor's mouth almost smiled. He stepped back to his place and let the hall breathe, then spoke to the whole room. Let it be understood that the prince has chosen to speak plainly. We will not scourge him for honesty when deception would be easier. Those who whisper now will tire. Those who shout will find their audience smaller. He did not issue decrees beyond what needed saying. He did not name futures. He did what is hardest. He allowed the truth to stand without turning it into a performance. The Duke's eyes were unreadable. He bowed. It was a bow without grace, but with obedience. He would not forget. He would not soon forgive. He would stand where he always had stood, and the court would learn a new arrangement around him. The audience ended not with flourish, but with the subtle shift of bodies that signaled a decision had been made, and protocol would carry it into muscle memory. Alexandra turned to Claire. He did not take her hand here. He would not make her carry experiment on a stage. He nodded toward the door through which the garden lay like a promised breath beyond heavy air. They walked out under all the eyes. The twins clutched the wooden horse and stared at bright boots and polished floors and people who had never been this close to their lives. Claire kept her chin level. Alexandra's shadow crossed theirs like a vow stitched into cloth. The garden received them with a smell of damp gravel warming under a late sun. Birds worked the orange trees with small industry. The fountain whispered without caring what anyone whispered elsewhere. The children slipped free of the measured pace and ran, hedged in by hedges cut into the lines of discipline. The wooden horse clicked against stone, then skittered, then was rescued with glee. Alexandra stopped at the edge of a path and let his breath catch up with his spine. He was not made for running away. He felt light for having stopped trying. Claire stood beside him, not touching, not separated, a configuration that felt exactly like the truth. "Are you angry with me?" he asked, because the question had lived like a pebble under his tongue all day. "Yes," she said, and the honesty made a kind of peace. And grateful, and afraid, and relieved. She turned, and her eyes made him feel seen, not as a prince, and not as a penitent, but as a man who had spent too long in a room without a window and had finally found a door. "I do not deserve forgiveness," he said. "Probably not," she said, "but you can deserve trust. By degrees." "I will measure myself by those degrees," he said. The twins' laughter lifted, clean, high, the sound a city cannot buy and cannot counterfeit. Claire's mouth curved despite itself. The curve met the day and both improved. He watched her watch them. "I cannot promise you ease," he said. "Only this. I will not leave, not the way I did, not in small ways or large." "Then stand," she said. "Stand here. Stand there. Stand when it is quieter than this. Stand when it is louder." He inclined his head, accepting terms signed in breath. "I will." They walked, not speaking for a while, letting quiet be something they used together, instead of something that kept them apart. The boys invented a game in which the wooden horse had to cross an ocean made of gravel without losing a wheel it did not have. Each time it faltered, they steadied it, and the small victory rippled outward, ridiculous and holy. "Do you regret kneeling?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question, and him too. "No," he said. "It is the first thing I have done that has my whole self in it." "You are a strange man," she said, but without heat. "I have been worse." Nearby, a gardener passed at the end of a path, glanced up, then looked down again with proper discretion. The court would learn which way to look. The city would talk until it tired. The world would rethread itself around this new line. "Will they be happy here?" she asked, and for the first time fear bent in her voice. "They will be happy wherever you are," he said, "and with me if I earn it." "Earn it," she said. It had taken the place of kindness and felt stronger. The boys called to them suddenly, urgent with joy. "Look!" They pointed to a path of sunlight laid between clipped hedges, their faces lit as if they had discovered gold. The wooden horse rode the bright strip as if it had been waiting for that road all its life. The twins ran ahead, the toy bobbing between them, the light catching in their hair. Claire's eyes shone. She did not cry. She had learned not to long ago. He saw the restraint and honored it. "Do you want my arm?" he asked, not to guide her, but to balance the world. She hesitated, then set her hand lightly in the crook of his elbow. He felt the exact weight of it, the way it was both tender and conditional. He did not pull her closer. They took 2 steps like that, then 3, and in the summing of small motions, found something that looked like a beginning. "Tell me their favorite food," he said suddenly, because love sometimes starts in details and grows into declarations that don't break. She glanced at him, half skeptical, half amused. "Soup with too much bread in it." "We will see about the bread," he said, and drew a smile he had not earned and accepted as down payment on a better life. They reached the boys. One had found a snail shell, pale as bone and spiraled with a mathematics no court ever decreed. He held it high, and the sun made it almost transparent. The other stood still so long the fountain seemed to adjust its rhythm to include him. Alexandra crouched and let the garden bring his body to where small lives are lived. The boys crowded him at once, trusting their news would matter to the man whose coat had signed the air of their town all morning, and now simply spoke warmth and leather and a patient lap. He looked up at Claire, and she looked down at him, and in that angle, an entire day redeemed itself. "May I keep this?" one boy asked, and held up the shell. "If your mother says so," he said, and the boy turned already, comforted by a world in which the permission that mattered had a name he knew. Claire nodded. "If you don't break it." "I won't," he said, then immediately nearly dropped it and caught it again, and the mixture of pride and panic on his face made both adults laugh softly, the way one laughs when hope startles. They stayed until shadows lengthened and didn't threaten. A breeze lifted and set, the day's pulse gentle now. The wooden horse did one last brave crossing, triumphant at the foot of an orange tree, nose pressed to the trunk as if the journey had been toward shelter all along. Alexandra straightened. The palace loomed behind him, and he did not hate it. It had rooms and rules and watchers and wars. It could also hold a table and soup with bread and 2 small coats hung to dry beside a larger one. He would learn to make his face a shield, and his name a roof. He looked at Claire. The light had found the brown in her hair, the planes of her cheek, the steadiness he had once mistook for shyness. He wanted to touch her. He did not. He let the wanting be part of the air. "Tomorrow," he said, as if trying the word out with new meaning. "Tomorrow," she answered, matching him not in promise but in possibility. The boys ran back, breathless, demanding the world admire what they had seen. Claire crouched and listened like a queen greeting ambassadors of wonder. Alexandre listened too, learning what matters, one small report at a time. When the bell inside the palace chimed the hour, it surprised him to realize the sound did not call him away. It sounded like permission. He offered his arm again, and she took it without ceremony, and they walked toward the doors, not as a secret stitched poorly through days, but as a family learning the steps of a life that would hold. The wooden horse rode between the twins, its carved floor under a thumb like a memory that had stopped accusing and started belonging. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.